Judge Brett Kavanaugh is now a U.S. Supreme Court justice despite a brutal confirmation process, including sexual assault claims against him. The final vote confirming Kavanaugh came Saturday with 50 votes for and 48 against. It was the closest roll call to confirm a justice since 1881. Kavanaugh was sworn in later that evening by Chief Justice John Roberts and retiring Justice Anthony Kennedy. 4 other justices were also on hand for the quiet ceremony held with Kavanaugh and his family. In the wake of what has to be the most dramatic confirmation hearing of all time, leaders on both sides agree the Democratic and Republican parties are as divided as ever, and both believe what happened with the Kavanaugh hearing has energized their bases and expect to see the results of that in the November midterm election. Another element of the still hotly debated following Kavanaugh's confirmation is what this means for victims of sexual assault. There were women both for and against Kavanaugh following the abuse claims against him. Joining me now to discuss the fallout of both politically and culturally is Jenna Ellis with the Dr. James Dobson Family Institute and Suraj Hasmi of the Washington Examiner. Thank you both for joining us. First of all, let's begin talking about the politics, Suraj. How do you think this will play out heading into the November election?
But as soon as you brought in these allegations of sexual assault against a highly qualified jurist serving on the D.C. appellate court for 12 years, this really united Republicans because based on what we actually were presented, the evidence from Dr. Christine Blasey Ford to Julie Swetnick to Debbie Ramirez, it was highly uncorroborated, and there was not enough evidence to support these allegations. So Republicans, and Mitch McConnell said this best, nothing unites Republicans more than a court fight. And Senate Democrats probably pulled every dirty political trick in the book and really united Republicans in a way that few have actually thought would happen. And Democrats actually have a steeper hill to climb, not only in the Senate, but also in the House when it comes to November, because if you come up against a united Republican base, that's going to spell trouble for you in the midterm election.
Jenna, what are your thoughts there?
I would agree with Sharice to the extent that this really has definitely galvanized the base. I think that for the faith-based communities as well, I mean, the reason that many of us, myself included, voted for Donald Trump in the 2016 election is because we were so concerned about the future of the Supreme Court and not allowing an activist agenda to continue for the next 30 to 40 years. And so the fact that the Democrats came out so transparently against any potential nominee before they even knew Brett Kavanaugh's name, and then the fact that they were just so transparent that this was a political hit job, that really will, I think, show in the midterm elections that people who may otherwise sit home will now say, you know what, this could be my father, my brother, my son that is at the point of these types of allegations, and we need to protect fundamental due process. We need to make sure that we are getting out and voting for conservative values to protect and preserve liberty for all, which means fundamental fairness and due process.
Now let's get to the cultural debate, if you will, which will probably go on long after the election. Jenna, we'll begin with you. Liberal women's groups like the Women's March are calling it, quote, the dying gasp of an out-of-touch establishment trying to stave off the Me Too movement and the women's wave. Your thoughts on that statement?
Well, I wrote a piece for National Review last week about why women should stand for Brett Kavanaugh. And we need to understand what's happening in the culture here. For women to say that in order to be pro-women, you have to be anti-man, that's just not fundamentally consistent with not only the Christian worldview, but the American fundamental values of liberty and freedom for all. Of course, there are legitimate true victims and there are false accusations. That's why we have due process in the court context. But what's happening in culture is that we are being presumptively anti-man. And this is actually going back to everything that the civil rights movement was against in the 1960s, that there were presumptions of guilt based on race and color. Now, if we're doing that based on gender, we are back into undoing everything that the civil rights movement stood for. And so we have to understand that this is a cultural issue, not just a political one.
Suraj, a colleague of yours at the Examiner, wrote about Taylor Swift coming out and saying she couldn't vote for Republican Marsha Blackburn in Tennessee, despite the fact that she's a woman, obviously not lining up with her politically or socially. Is this an example, you think, of the divide in our nation, even among women?
Well, it's an interesting time for Taylor Swift to come out in support of Phil Bredesen, who only days before the confirmation vote for Brett Kavanaugh, announced that he would vote yes for Brett Kavanaugh. So a lot of the things that Taylor Swift seems to be coming out in support of, whether it be human rights, equality rights, women's pay, LGBTQ rights, those are all things that Democrats have said that Brett Kavanaugh is all against. So for Phil Bredesen to say he's in support of Kavanaugh, that's pretty contradictory to what Taylor Swift is in support of. At the same time, this cultural divide, it's pretty funny, really, to think of this proxy war now between Taylor Swift and Kanye West coming from the 2009 MTV Video Music Awards, in which Kanye West has become a giant Trump acolyte, and now Taylor Swift, who has withheld her political opinions for the last 2 years, now finds this time to come out with and voice her political opinions. It absolutely is an interesting time for celebrities to come out into the fray and voice their political opinions. I do reject the notion that, if a celebrity is good at one thing that they can't voice their political opinions, they should be allowed to voice their political opinions. We should just be allowed to criticize them for it.
Jenna, your thoughts there?
Yeah, I would agree with that every person who's a voter in America has a right to speak their views. I mean, that's the fundamental notion of freedom of speech, that we can advance our ideas in the marketplace. But what's happened is that there are only certain voices that women's march groups, Planned Parenthood, progressive left want to accept. If you look at what the Women's March posted this morning with this banner over Susan Collins' picture saying that she's now a rape apologist, that's what the left is all about. They are supportive of women only who agree with their particular agenda. That's not equality for all. That's not being pro-women. That's being pro-agenda. And so what we have to remember as an evangelical community is that we're voting our values. We're not just voting for a political outcome. We're voting for freedom of speech, freedom of association, and free exercise of religion for all. And we have to make sure that we're preserving and protecting our fundamental values. That's why Dr. Dobson's and the Policy Center's Get Out and Vote campaign is values-centered, not party advocates.
Protesters were outraged that Kavanaugh was confirmed. Why can't our society take this into consideration and not take it as another attack on women or victims of sexual abuse? Suraj?
Well, the thing is with Brett Kavanaugh, and a lot of victims who had in their past, they experienced sexual assault, sexual harassment, rape. They feel dejected right now, and a lot of them feel that their voices weren't heard, and that this is somehow a rejection of what matters to them. Jenna put it perfectly that accusations. And false accusations specifically are made all the time, and we have no idea about the legitimacy of some of these accusations about Brett Kavanaugh. But what we do know, and what the evidence has presented, is that it cannot be corroborated that he actually did these things. And so you have to bring up the question whether it's a political hit job, and most signs point towards yes, simply because the political leanings of the Supreme Court definitively shift towards the right in the conservative direction with the departure of Anthony Kennedy, who was largely thought to be a swing vote, even though he was appointed by Ronald Reagan, to now Justice John Roberts, who is appointed by Bush as being the swing vote because Brett Kavanaugh is a conservative jurist who who basically comes up with his opinions as a textualist of the Constitution.
We're about out of time, but Jen, I'll give you the final word there.
Yeah, and so what conservatives and also even the left need to realize is that this is one confirmation, and in the context of the public opinion, everyone has a right to be heard because we have freedom of speech, but you don't have a right to be believed. You can advocate for your values in the court of public opinion, but when it comes down to every individual instance, we can't go in and always share our opinion on every single case and instance. So you have to separate this one instance and the lack of corroboration with the bigger overall thing that we all can agree on, which is that sexual assault is morally wrong, but also due process fairly protects those who are merely accused before we can show proof.
Suraj Hasmi of the Washington Examiner and Jenna Ellis, thank you so much both for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The manhunt is still underway for the man who shot and killed 2 people in Israel. He is believed to be a Palestinian terrorist who was employed as an electrician in the plant where the 2 victims worked. The 29-year-old mother of 1 and the 35-year-old father of 3 were shot as they worked in the Barkan industrial zone near the city of Ariel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described the attack as severe and said the murderer would be brought to justice. Now, this is the first attack of this kind at the plant where Israelis and Palestinians have worked together for some 35 years. A court ruling in the case of Asia Bibi, the Christian mother in Pakistan convicted of blasphemy, has been postponed after Islamic extremists rioted over the weekend. The Pakistan Supreme Court said they'll delay their announcement. Joining us now with more on that is senior international correspondent Gary Lane. He's covered this story closely for many years and has met several times with Asia's family. So, Gary, what happened that was supposed to happen for the decision here today?
Well, Asia had waited for many years for this day, Ephraim. She wanted to have her appeal finally heard.
Absolutely.
2 years ago, it was set to be heard by the Pakistani Supreme Court. Well, one of the justices on the three-member panel recused himself. So she's been waiting for 2 years now to finally have her day. So today was supposed to be the day. The Supreme Court felt intimidated by this mob and felt that they should back off and not make the announcement on their decision until there has been some calm and time pass.
I hate for the delay. Yeah. Now, some of our viewers may be new to this story. Give us an idea. Who is Asia Bibi and some background on what happened to this Pakistani
Asia Bibi is a mother of 2 biological children. She had about 3 other children that are stepchildren. But she, in June 2009, she was working in a fruit orchard, and some of her Muslim colleagues said, Asia, go fetch us some water. So she went to get them some water. She came back with the water, and they threw it down and said, well, this has been contaminated. It's been desecrated by a Christian, an infidel. And so they wouldn't take it. They had an argument that ensued. And in that argument, Ephraim, some words back and forth, and they said something to her about her Christian faith. She responded, she said, well, my Jesus has saved me. What has your prophet ever done for you? And out of that, a mob came around, started beating her. Police took her away, and she was charged with blasphemy against the prophet Muhammad. Now, blasphemy against Muhammad in Pakistan, if you're convicted of that, the sentence is death.
Indeed. How is she doing?
Well, she's had some medical challenges over the years. She has had some stomach issues. Apparently, she had some issues with her stomach in a solitary cell. There have been attempts to poison her, so that's why she's in solitary and cooks her own food, does her own housekeeping of her cell. In addition to that, there have been some thoughts that she may be getting dementia and also suffer from depression. So it's 9.5 years for something that she claims she never did or said. And here we are. We're waiting for the results.
What may happen next?
Well, this is the final appeal, and if the court has said that Asia is not guilty, then a mob could come, as we saw right in our own capital, mobs trying to get their own way. But in this case, they get very violent and they intimidate the justices. They may come and take matters into their own hands and kill her. So that's why, if it is a positive decision in her favor, that she needs to be taken out of the country silently, in the quiet of night, covertly, so she will be safe, and her family members as well. There are a number of countries that have offered her asylum.
Indeed. Well, we'll certainly continue to pray, Gary.
Yes, we need to be praying for her safety and that of her family.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gary. Coming up, upgraded from tropical storm to hurricane, Michael is heading for the coast of Florida. Michael is now a hurricane as it moves toward the Gulf of Mexico. Forecasters say it could strengthen into a major hurricane with winds topping 111 miles an hour. One projected path shows it hitting the Florida and Panhandle and moving into southeast Alabama, into Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. It could make landfall as a Category 2 hurricane. Meanwhile, the Florida governor has already declared a state of emergency. People in the Carolinas are hoping Michael takes a different path. They are still on the long road to recovery from Hurricane Florence. More than 4,300 homes were damaged, homes like Julia McGriff's. She was hospitalized after the mold became too much for her, but that's when Operation Blessing stepped in to help.
When Julia McGriff returned to New Bern, North Carolina after Hurricane Florence, she didn't realize how much damage had been done to her home.
My thought was my house has survived. I could mop up the floors, I could wash down things, and I could stay here.
But she couldn't. The 2 to 3 feet of floodwater had ruined almost everything she owned.
The refrigerator, the stove, my deep freezer, it stopped working completely. Drywall has to be removed. Cabinets has to be removed, the bottom cabinets. I was looking at things that I thought I could keep, and come to find out, even if it dry out, the mold will still be there.
She salvaged a few things and put them in storage. After just a few days, the mold actually landed Julia in the hospital with breathing trouble.
I just wanted to holler and scream.
When she heard about Operation Blessing's disaster relief efforts and we sent a team out to help, things started to change.
Like a cavalry. They come in ready to work, and they did.
We moved cabinets, took out drywall, and got everything ready for Julia's house to be dried out, so she can eventually move back home without worrying about mold or breathing problems.
It's like kind of a burden being lifted. It just gave me relief. Gave me some relief and happiness, because things are on the way to getting back on track.
Julia wants to make sure others get the same help she got.
Continue your donations, because it is really needed to keep Operation Blessing working, because they don't only do this for us, they do it for every disaster. And the people that's in the disaster really needs that. Thank you all, and thank God for you.
The threat of aftershocks have people in northern Haiti dragging mattresses and chairs outside. At least a dozen people were killed after a strong earthquake struck over the weekend. The U.S. Geological Survey says a 5.9 magnitude earthquake hit, and not long after that, a 5.2 aftershock rattled northern Haiti. More than 150 people were also injured. Emergency authorities say victims are without electricity, homes and hospitals have become overcrowded. And still ahead, Houston Texan Andre Howell has a powerful story of faith in the face of the Big C. Stay with us. Playing pro football has even more significance for Houston Texans Andre Hall. After being diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma in June, he is now saying he is in remission. Joining us more with this powerful faith story is Sean Brown with CBN Sports. So Hall, a safety with the Texans, and says he didn't want chemo because he didn't want to miss playing ball this year.
Yeah, man. Hey, look, this is a now league. Coming off a strong season in 2017, came in the league in 2014. Started out as a cornerback, now safety. Just signed a 3-year deal with Houston last season, and then early this season, obviously, he was diagnosed with cancer, and that, no one really knows how to respond to that. But in dealing with that, if he's not on the field and you can't play, it's kind of hard to acknowledge, to fulfill your commitment. And so he wants to be on the field. He wanted to continue in that process. So yeah, he chose a different form. Naturally, they would do chemo, but chemo can take a toll on your body. Yeah. And he didn't want anything messing with his body. He said, you know what, we're going to do a different option. He chose to do Rituxan, I believe, which is not as harsh. You take it through IV. He did that for about a month, and then after about a month, he realized that there was something going on with his brain. Wow. And then he started doing vitamin C infusions, I believe he said. And then, believe it or not, the cancer was gone, the stuff in his brain was gone, and now he's actually just kind of waiting to find out if he's able to play. Physically, he feels good, and it's like he's ready to play. So.
Wow. And I imagine in light of all this and what we're seeing thus far, he's giving credit to God for healing.
He is. A lot of people wonder what professional sports, or what faith has to do with professional sports. Yeah. What does faith have to do with professional sports? Well, you look at football players, these guys are putting their bodies through, they're just going through it every single Sunday, Thursday, Monday, whenever they play. And at any moment they could be injured. You know what I mean? And their bread and butter is being on the field. Yeah. And so it's not too far-fetched to think that a player, who has a solid foundation is going to put God before everything else, because you don't know what your future is going to hold.
Absolutely.
And for Andre, that's it. He said, look, man, God is everything. My faith is what has gotten me through this. And one of the things I wrote down, he says, once I felt normal, I started to heal in one of the press conferences. Once he started to feel normal. And normal for him means reading books, making sure his mind was right, making sure he was taking the right approach, surrounding himself with players, like-minded players, to make sure that his focus was, hey, I've got this, God's got this, I'm not worried at all. And so, yes, his faith means everything before that and then throughout this process. And so it's always interesting when people say, what does faith have to do with professional sports? Well, it's not just when they're sick, but it also covers them before that. And then when you go through something like this, you have something stronger than yourself. Because sometimes we're not strong enough to deal with those things physically or mentally. And you definitely want to try to lean on a higher power. And that's what he's doing. And I think it's fantastic that he's hopefully will make it back soon.
Good deal. So any idea when we will know if he'll be?
I believe he's still waiting to be cleared.
Okay.
I looked at the depth chart. He's not on the depth chart, at least not right now.
Yeah.
In that presser, he said that he's just kind of waiting for clearance. He's listed as reserve for illness, and then once he's cleared to play, I'm sure he'll be back and causing damage for those offenses. But it is fantastic to see, and I'm glad that he's been cured of that as of right now. So it's pretty fantastic.
All praise to God. Thank you,
man.
Sean. Much appreciated.
You're
Always
so
good to
welcome.
have you right here. Thank you. A powerful moment of worship and ministry with Christian music star Lauren Daigle. See how she shares her love of Christ with those behind bars. That story is coming up after this. Lauren Daigle is one of the most popular artists in contemporary Christian music right now. Her amazing voice with songs like You Say draw listeners of all ages. She says her visit to Statesville Correction Prison was a day more than I can articulate. That's a direct quote. She posted this video about the visit on her Facebook page. She went to lead worship and said she saw hope in the face of the hopeless, joy in the wake of sorrow, wealth in the gap of depravity, and life in the midst of death. Take a look. As the inmates' voices carry deeper into our hearts than the echo of a microphone will ever release. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of CBN Newswatch. Remember, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. We'd also love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make it a marvelous Monday.